Hey everyone, thanks for joining. Of course, back here with David. Got an exciting Q&A video. I know we took a bunch of them in the Telegram, as well as co.ca and some other places we kind of pulled from. Look, we aren't going to be able to get to everybody, but we are going to probably get through a good like 10 questions here. I got some pretty meaty ones. So first things first, David, how are you?
I'm doing great, Jason. Thanks. How about you?
Yeah, good. I know we're juggling some time zones here, but things are good. No
Good.
complaints. And excited. Obviously a lot of questions I always see as a good thing. A lot of excitement, a lot of people interested, and a lot of new people interested in Vaxil. So awesome. But
Excellent.
without further ado, so here the first question I have on my list, and there might be some bouncing back and forth. So someone says, is news still on track? So we did a video obviously talking about when people can expect news. So can we still expect news by the end of January, early February, like we stated before?
So the answer is roughly yes. There are always things that get in the way and make it plus or minus a few days based on logistics. All different kinds of things can happen. You can have a delay in the lab because a lab isn't available or a certain machine isn't available. And biology, sometimes it just takes a little longer for an immune response. So the news flow still is roughly what we said, but be patient with us. We're doing whatever we can to stick to those timelines, and we will aim to stick to them plus or minus.
Perfect. Yeah, plus or minus a few days. I don't think anyone's going to complain too much about. So awesome answer. This one I thought was pretty interesting, and don't want to. I'm sure this could be a whole video, but I'd love just to get it in 30 seconds to a minute. Could you define the vision for the company for the next 3 to 5 years?
Excellent question. Thanks, Jason. It's actually a pleasure to answer a question like that. Yeah, so the real high level answer, and like you said, we can go into the weeds at another time. But basically, what we try to do now and for the next few years is strengthen the platform and the evidence behind the platform. So we want to convince everybody that signal peptides are the way to go across oncology and infectious diseases. We're hoping that our COVID program does that and helps us to build that story, as well as other programs that we're working on in infectious disease, and then of course in oncology. So we want to convince people that signal peptides are both a viable and a strong platform for treatment and for vaccine. And we want to keep expanding our pipeline, both within that space and also beyond.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome. Well, you did that pretty well in 30 seconds. So yeah, I know that's great. Obviously, looking to prove the technology you guys are looking at, and we'll go from there.
Great.
So here, alrighty. Third question. So seeing as there has been several instances where a drug that was used to treat a separate condition has been used to treat COVID, or at least attempted, is there possibility for Vaxil's candidate to be sped through trials, given it uses the same platform as they have ImmuneSyn here, which was orphan drug status approved from the FDA?
Yeah, so just to be clear, it was the orphan status that we got on ImmuneSyn. The drug was obviously not yet approved. We never submitted it for approval. And the simple answer to that is yes, it is possible. I cannot predict what might happen. And it's always based on evidence and conversations with regulators. So, we're always looking for these kinds of ways to accelerate the program. And they range from generating more evidence to having conversations with regulators to see how we can get the programs advanced as quickly as possible.
Cool. No, awesome. I think a good answer for sure. And of course, for those watching, David is locked. We can only talk about, of course, what's public, and we can't go too deep into what could happen or what might happen. So just give people some insight. We're trying to do our best, but people got to bear with us here that there is only so much we can say. So here, fourth question. So why were you able to move so quickly to a COVID vaccine candidate? What previous lung research was useful?
So the first part of why we could move quickly is because of the tools we have that we've built over the years. We call it Vaxhit, which is our discovery tool. And we're actually doing more work on that now to optimize the tool, make it work better and faster. but it allows us to find the right signal peptide targets fairly quickly. And then in terms of what previous work we've done, so I suppose the most impactful work was tuberculosis, where we saw that we could challenge animals with tuberculosis. These animals had previously been vaccinated with our signal peptide vaccine, and they were, we did see protection there. So that's the basis as well for this USAMRIID experiment.
Here, so this one I thought was interesting. I definitely wanted to throw in a kind of IP, question. So here, are you confident your intellectual property, IP, is solid and protected? And then they have here, I'm not even going down the road of royalties, buyout, etc., but really just, is the IP solid?
Yeah, simple answer is yes. We're quite confident in our IP. We've got some really good patents that are both specific, but also we have some space that we cover more generally, which is really exciting and allows us to move more freely, especially in infectious diseases. And then every time we move toward discovering a new vaccine or treatment, we do more specific patents for those. Simple
Awesome.
answer, yes.
Cool. No, I think that's good. Firm. Yeah, you're confident, and of course, it's an ongoing process. Filing patents. So that's awesome to hear. So here, next
Yep.
question: how long does it generally take to complete, sorry, phase one in an emergency state?
So we see lots of different things, and obviously it depends on what's happening and what the results look like. But sometimes it can be done in a matter of weeks, 4 to 6 to 8 weeks, at least to get enough data. The phase one will continue, just like as we hear about the emergency approvals, let's say from Pfizer and from Moderna, they're continuing their studies. It's not that they stop all their studies and they're done. They continue to do and follow the patients who've been vaccinated. So a phase one can continue while the regulators allow us to continue to phase two.
How will the mice be exposed via airborne inhalation or needle?
So it's an inhalation technique. It's not airborne, but it is an inhalation technique.
Cool.
That's the way COVID works. So we just mimic the natural process.
Makes sense.
Same
Simple
thing, by the
answer.
way, that we did in tuberculosis.
Cool. Awesome. All righty. Can you please tell us in more detail how your vaccine candidate manufacturing process differs from current vaccines? A follow-up to that would be if specialized equipment is needed for manufacturing Vaxil's vaccine, or can local manufacturers get the Vaxil recipe and start manufacturing easily?
Wow, complex question, complicated answer. Let me start by saying that our manufacturing technology is not what is used traditionally with vaccines, where there are bioreactors involved or egg yolks and all these other things that are complicated and yield to and create some issues with the manufacturing. Ours is a chemical process, fairly straightforward and simple. Any manufacturing process does require some specific machinery. Ours is not particularly complicated. It's readily available. There are manufacturers around that do this stuff, contract manufacturers. But it's not like all of a sudden, you'd be creating these biologic drugs that require these very difficult processes. Could any manufacturer do it? No. They would need to know how to do it. They would obviously need to have a license from us because of the IP, the question that was asked earlier. But we would be able to share potentially with contract manufacturers some knowledge to figure out how to manufacture. We could distribute the manufacturing. It can be done in developing countries as well that have certain basic manufacturing capabilities. It's really not the sophisticated or more advanced biologics types of manufacturing that we hear about. So the answer is yes, under the right licensing agreements and proper IP protection, it could be distributed. The machinery is relatively available compared to some of the other things. mRNA technology is also not as complex as some of these other biologic methodologies. I'm not sure if I can compare the mRNA to the signal peptide technology, but ours is pretty straightforward. Once the process is established, scaling up is easy. It's also very inexpensive which allows us to position ourselves very, very effectively as a global distributor.
Yeah, cool. No, I think that was a great answer. Not that complex in my opinion, but awesome.
Good.
So cool. Here, a question about money. We see this one often. How long will the exercise warrant money from the previous private placement raise last until you need to do another round?
So I have to say, as we say in all of our statements, we're always open and looking to raise money, right? As a company in our position, where we're in an industry that uses money, maybe significantly more than average, right? Clinical trials are very expensive. We're always thinking about money and how to raise money, and always open to those opportunities. So, and that's regardless of how much money is in the bank. I think that's just a smart way to operate. Um, the second part of the answer to that question really depends on strategy and results. So depending on what we see, for instance, if we were to see the oral experiment succeed in a reasonable way, we would then begin investing in oral delivery technologies. If we see the USAMRIID experiment succeed, we would be progressing from there into the next stages of our research. The conversations with regulators would allow us to know what those next steps would look like. So it's a little hard to say exactly how long money lasts because it depends on these different programs. We also have the oncology program that we're progressing, where, depending on what we see there, we would invest more heavily there.
Yeah. No, and I think it's important, obviously, to say exactly what you said. The plan, there's a moving target. If you see good results, or you see a certain area you want to invest in, you want to accelerate,
We
you
go.
need money to push forward. So it makes
Yeah.
sense. But hey, I thought that was a pretty good answer to a question that is hard for sure. So cool. No, I
Thanks.
appreciate that. So here, we're already on number 10. We're kind of firing through these. Are
Cool.
there plans to acquire your own production facilities if either of the products should prove to be effective? Or would manufacturing have to be done by a third party?
So in the initial stages of any of our programs, in the foreseeable future, we would work with outside manufacturers. There are two types of manufacturing. There's non-GMP and GMP. The non-GMP allows us to do research experiments in the lab, including some of our animal experiments. And then the GMP manufacturing is the one that's done for use in humans, where the conditions are much more monitored, evaluated. Shelf life matters because you have to see how long it'll sit in a pharmacy somewhere, and so on. It's easier to do non-GMP. It's easier to imagine that we could bring that type of work in-house at some point. It's not something that we're focused on at the moment because it's readily accessible externally. It's not an expertise that we need to own at the moment. We own the knowledge of how to do this stuff, and we partner at the moment in order to execute. Sometime down the road, would we look at our own manufacturing? It's possible. I wouldn't rule it out, but it's not necessarily an expertise that I feel it's critical for us to own at the moment.
So we have, will Vaxil license their products to third parties or distribute them on their own? Have you given this any thoughts? I know a little
Yeah.
early.
Yeah, so unfortunately, I give all these things a lot of thought, and we won't get into what keeps me up at night. But I think licensing is something we're open to at any stage. It relates back to the financing question. So if somebody were willing to put money in exchange for a licensing opportunity, we would certainly examine that. Do we aim to be a full service pharma company out in the future? I would say yes. The question is when. It's probably not the first thing I would do. So it's like the manufacturing question. I think allowing us to build out our portfolio would be the #1 priority. And if out licensing a product to a company would allow us to build a stronger base, then that would probably be the right thing to do. So it's a great question, and it is something that I'm always batting around in my head and trying to see what's going on in the industry. I myself have been involved in a bunch of these things, so I have some experience in these conversations. And again, like with financing, we're open to all these kinds of conversations. Sometimes we'll initiate, sometimes others contact us. We're not at a point where we're ready to license for distribution at the moment because we're not close enough to having a drug. So those are not conversations I would have at the moment. But the ones that relate more to financing are relevant even at this point in time.
Yeah, cool. No, I think that was a good answer to a question when you're extremely early stage. But nice to know that you're already thinking about, hey, when we get there, that's awesome. Please ask David to expand on the oral application, as this is very new to many ears. Um, I got another question here too. I'll kind of combine them, and you can let me know where you want to start. Can the oral application in context of COVID be equal to or better than a needle? Is there anything you want to expand there, but then also talk about kind of oral application, or do you want
Yeah,
to pick one?
sure. Yeah, I mean, I'll explain generally kind of what got me thinking about this to begin with. I think the idea, there are a couple of issues with vaccination. One of them is on the more internal side, and one is on the more external side, and that's kind of what got us thinking in the direction of the oral. On the internal side, manufacturing. So we got some really cool questions about manufacturing, and manufacturing is not a small issue. It's always going to be something that we have to think about. And especially with our platform, part of our success and what we expect to be successful ability to treat or treat prophylactically with a vaccine, significant part of that is due to something in this nature of signal peptides, which is they don't like water. They're very hydrophobic. And that creates opportunities in manufacturing that we have to look at and consider. So an oral for us helps us with manufacturing. The second part is, obviously, oral vaccines, you don't see many of them. So it's not something that you can say, wow, this is obvious that it would work. And there are good reasons why not too many people pursue oral vaccines. We thought we had an opportunity to see if we could generate the immune response through oral delivery. And so we thought it was worth a try. And if we can do it, I do believe it's a game changer for vaccination because, there are people who are needle phobic. There are people where there are issues around that method of delivery. There's storage conditions. There are a lot of reasons why an oral delivery works much better. And both in the way that the COVID vaccine, for instance, is already being done today, as an example, but also in the ways that it's not. So if you look at some of the reports coming out of the WHO, the vast majority of the world doesn't even have any idea how they're going to get close to vaccination, right? There are only a very few countries that are vaccinating their population at the moment. If you can switch to an oral, distribution to developing countries and so on is huge, and it's much simpler, much more straightforward. And the world won't be able to walk away from COVID until many more people get vaccinated. So I think we need oral. And at the same time, there are very few companies looking at this. So if we can do it, I think it's a game changer. If not, we move on. We just keep going with what we already thought about. So I don't see it as a bad outcome if we cannot do it. It just would be great if we can. Is oral delivery better than the needle? I can't say. It's part of what we're exploring. And it'll be a while till we know. That won't be something that we'll know early in the process. We'll have to learn along the way. And as we've learned about how to manufacture and formulate through needle delivery, we'll also have to learn about the oral. I think I hit on the main issues of that question, but
Yeah,
tell me if
no,
I missed something.
I think you killed it. One person, it was just expanding on the oral application. We saw other people like, oh, is there a difference? Like, in testing, is it take one pill and then another, animal takes 20? Those are questions we were getting. I don't know if you want to address those or if that's something we can't say.
Well, at some point we would have to get to that issue. We're not really up to that level of, it's a very preliminary experiment, what we're doing. It's really very early to just see if we can even remotely possibly generate an immune response through some type of oral delivery. And we're exploring some different methods of that. Yep. If we see a positive signal, we would then go on and develop the technology more specifically, number one. And then number two, we'd get into things eventually like dosing and all that other stuff.
Exactly.
So there's a specific kind of experiment you do to check for dosing, and we would run that experiment eventually.
Yep.
We're not
So
there yet.
I actually saw a lot of people respond with, "Oh, dosing will come later," and things like that. So I
Yeah.
appreciate the other people that actually answered some of the questions that people asked. Even
Mhm.
though we were gonna do a Q&A video, saw a lot of questions get answered, which was awesome. So here,
Great.
kind of the final stretch here. So I have, what percentage of efficacy would you need to see in the challenge to to keep working with Corvax?
Yeah. So I think the first part of the answer to that is that there are statistical tools that we always use to evaluate results and make sure not only that we're seeing them sort of with the naked eye, but also with statistical significance. So we use statistical tools. In a challenge experiment, there's also something that's just more obvious, especially in something like COVID, and we saw also somewhat in tuberculosis, where COVID kills. So if we see that the vaccinated animals don't die, that's kind of the most obvious way that we would look for the result. But there are also immune response tests that we do to see whether what type of viral load is occurring in the lungs and so on and so forth. So we'll look at a whole range of things so that we understand as much as possible about what type of response we're seeing. But we'll get a general read just by seeing how the animals survive or look at the end of the experiment.
Yeah, cool. No, awesome. I think that's a great question. The final one is, did you fix the impurities in the signal peptides that were first used?
So we've manufactured quite a few batches already, and we've refined the process along the way. And the peptides, signal peptides that we're using now, for instance, in the USAMRIID experiment, are quite good, and we're not encountering manufacturing problems or impurities at a level that concerns us. So I think the answer to that one is probably a yes.
Cool.
You
Yeah,
never
no, it
know
sounds like a
until you
yes.
get yeah, I mean, you never know until you get to the GMP manufacturing. As I mentioned earlier, there's two types of manufacturing. So, when we get to GMP, we'll have to look at this again and make sure that it meets the standards that the FDA would require for, a human trial. But what we're seeing so far looks good. We're not worried.
Cool. No, awesome. That's all on my list. I'll give you the opportunity. Is there any questions that you're getting a bunch that you wanted to throw in that you think we might have missed?
Wow.
Put you on the
That was
spot, I
quite
know.
Yeah, that was quite an extensive set of questions, and I think you've covered very well, Jason, the range of questions that I get. I get emails from people, and I know we're seeing lots of these questions come up on all the different platforms, and I'm really thrilled that people are that engaged and asking great questions. I think this set of questions was phenomenal, and I'm really happy to have the opportunity to address these questions. So, thanks, Jason.
Cool. No, I appreciate you taking the time, and I know the Telegram's new to some people too. I want to mention, we know, we're getting through it. It's a nice way for us to interact and, of course, pull questions and engage with with everyone, right? I want to say, if we didn't get to your question this video, we will definitely be doing more of these. I think I speak for David when I say that we like these. They went well. They feel good doing them. And it's great. So that being said, I'm sure after hopefully some more news and some more results, we'll do another Q&A video. We can invite, of course, a bunch of other questions in. And if I didn't get to your questions, after this video, of course, you can drop them below. I'll try and get you an answer, even just as a message, maybe not in a video format, or we can add on a few to future videos coming. But David, thanks so much for joining. This was great.
Thanks a lot, Jason, and special thanks to all the investors and others who put the questions up. I appreciate the level of engagement, the really deep questions, and it's great to have the opportunity to answer them, and hopefully to work together to improve the situation for patients. So
Perfect.
thanks.
Yeah, awesome. Well, if you made it this far, thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.